FIFA World Cup 2026 has just witnessed something that nobody in the history of this tournament has ever seen before. Not in 1930, not in 1966, not in 2006 when Zidane headbutted Materazzi in the final and the world stopped breathing. Not once in nearly 100 years of World Cup football has a player been shown a straight red card for covering his mouth with his hand. No foul, no violent conduct, no racist abuse confirmed by any evidence. Just a hand, just a gesture that every single one of us has made in a conversation at some point in our lives. And today, in front of 2 billion people watching around the world, FIFA enforced its most controversial rule for the very first time, and the moment it happened, the entire stadium went silent. Not the silence of a missed penalty, not the silence of an injury, the silence of 60,000 people sitting in their seats trying to understand what they had just witnessed. One gesture, one card, and a match that was never the same again from that second forward. Before we get into exactly what happened, who the player was, what the score was at that moment, and what it cost his team, I need you to understand something. This channel exists for one reason: to tell you what the big outlets won't. The channels that have sponsorship deals with FIFA partners. The broadcasters that need their press credentials renewed at the next tournament. The journalists who need to stay friendly with the right people to keep their access. They will cover this story carefully. They will use diplomatic language. They will present both sides with equal weight and leave you feeling like the truth is somewhere in the middle and nobody really knows. That is not what happens here. Here we tell you what we actually think. And what we think about what happened today is something that every honest football fan needs to hear clearly and without filters. So stay until the end, because this video is going to cover the moment itself, the rule behind it, the history that created that rule, the political decision-making at FIFA that turned one unresolved incident into a tournament-wide policy, the real cost of what happened today in sporting terms, and the question that nobody in the mainstream press is brave enough to ask out loud. Let's go. The match was in the round of 16. The stadium was packed. For once in this World Cup, which has faced serious and documented criticism for low attendance at several venues across the United States, this particular stadium was full. The atmosphere was real. The football in the first half had been genuinely competitive, and both teams had created chances. The score at the moment this happened was level. A knockout match. A World Cup round of 16. Everything on the line for both teams. Both nations watching from home. And then in the second half, during a moment of rising tension after a foul that several players on both sides disagreed with, a player covered his mouth with his hand while saying something to an opponent. The opponent reacted. The referee saw the gesture, and everything that followed happened in under 30 seconds. The referee reached into his pocket, not for a yellow card, straight to red. The player looked at the card, looked at the referee, looked at his own hands, as if he was trying to understand what part of his body had committed a crime. His teammates surrounded the referee immediately. The bench erupted. The opposing team's players stood back because even several of them visibly did not know what to do with what they had just seen. And the stadium, as I said, went quiet in that particular way that only happens when something occurs that falls outside the mental model that everyone in the building had when they walked in through the gates that morning. His team played the remaining 31 minutes of that match,
with 31 still on the
plus
clock,
extra time
the
with
World
10
Cup
men.
is
They
over.
lost. Their World Cup is over. And the debate that FIFA hoped would stay in press conferences and federation meetings has now exploded into the open, in a way that cannot be managed or spun or quietly resolved behind closed doors. Now let's go back to the beginning. Because you cannot understand today without understanding where this rule came from. And where it came from is a story that FIFA has never been fully honest about in public. Earlier this season in the Champions League, during a match that was being watched by millions of people across Europe, cameras captured a moment between Vinicius Jr. and a young Argentine player from Benfica named Prestiani. During a confrontation on the pitch, Prestiani covered his mouth with his shirt while saying something directly to Vinicius. Vinicius reacted with visible anger. The match was interrupted. The images went around the world within hours, and Vinicius, who has been the target of documented racist abuse at multiple points in his career in Spain, stated that Prestiani had called him a monkey. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable episodes in recent football governance. UEFA, opened an investigation. FIFA opened an investigation. Lip-reading experts were brought in and could not agree on what had been said. There was no microphone close enough to capture audio. There was no confession. There was no witness who heard the words clearly enough to testify to their content with certainty. And yet, FIFA handed Prestiani a 6-match international ban. He missed the start of World Cup qualification. His reputation was damaged globally, and the justification was built almost entirely on the gesture itself, on the act of covering his mouth, rather than on confirmed evidence of what was said. FIFA found itself in a position that sporting governance bodies dread. They had punished a player for something that could not be definitively proven. They had set a precedent that said the gesture of covering your mouth during a confrontation was itself evidence of intent to abuse. And having set that precedent, they needed to codify it. They needed to turn an ad hoc decision made under media pressure into an actual rule that could be applied consistently. Otherwise, the Prestiani decision looked like exactly what many observers at the time said it was: a politically motivated outcome designed to protect the image of their most marketable player rather than a finding based on evidence. So they created the rule. Any player who covers their mouth during a confrontation with a referee or an opponent receives a straight red card. No proof required of what was said, no context considered, no distinction between a player whispering tactical instructions to a teammate, a player saying something genuinely abusive, or a player simply shielding a private comment from the cameras. The gesture alone, the hand over the mouth, automatic ejection. 13 new rules were introduced for this World Cup. This was one of them. And when the federations were briefed on the full package of rule changes months before the tournament, the reaction was not quiet acceptance. England objected, Spain objected, France objected, Argentina, whose own player had been the subject of the incident that created the rule in the first place, objected loudly and formally. Portugal and Germany added their voices. Colombia raised separate but related concerns. 7 of the most powerful football federations in the world told FIFA before this tournament even started that these rules were unworkable, philosophically wrong, and in several cases genuinely dangerous for competitive fairness. FIFA did not change the rules, and today we got the first red card. Let's talk about what it actually cost in sporting terms, because I want to be precise here rather than emotional. 31 minutes plus additional time with 10 men in a knockout World Cup match is not a minor disadvantage. Every coach in world football will tell you that losing a player to a red card in a knockout match changes the fundamental nature of what is tactically possible. You cannot press with 10 men the way you press with 11. You cannot maintain the same defensive line. You cannot commit bodies forward in the same way when you are trying to protect a level scoreline. The team that received the red card had to completely reorganize their shape in real time, in a World Cup knockout match, under maximum pressure, because their player covered his mouth with his hand. The manager had to burn a substitution earlier than planned to restructure the team. That substitution, used defensively out of necessity in the 62nd minute, was a substitution that would otherwise have been saved for the final 20 minutes to introduce fresh legs or change the game tactically. The ripple effect of one red card on every subsequent decision in that match was total and complete, and ultimately they went out. Their tournament is finished. Whether they would have won with 11 men, we will never know. But the fact that they were forced to play a third of a knockout World Cup match with 10 men because of a hand gesture is a sporting reality that cannot be argued away with process and procedure. The reaction from the Players' Federation was immediate, and it was not diplomatic. Within an hour of the final whistle, their official statement used the word unjust 3 times. They called for an emergency review of the rule before the quarterfinals. They stated that their player had been eliminated from a World Cup, not for anything he said, and not for anything he did, but for a physical gesture that in any other context, in any other sport, in any other setting, would be considered completely normal human behavior. They are right. And the fact that they are right does not make FIFA wrong by accident. It makes FIFA wrong by design, because this rule was never really about protecting players from abuse. If it were about protecting players from abuse, FIFA would have invested in audio technology capable of actually capturing what is said on a football pitch. They have the resources. The technology exists. They chose not to use it. Instead, they chose the shortcut. Ban the gesture. Avoid the evidence problem entirely. And accept that some players will be punished for things they never said, because the alternative requires too much investment and too much institutional courage. Now, I want to say something that I have not heard anyone else say clearly in the hours since this happened. And I want you to think about it carefully because it matters beyond this specific incident. What FIFA did today, by enforcing this rule for the first time in a high-stakes knockout match, is establish that physical appearance can be used as evidence of intent in a sporting context without any supporting proof of the underlying act. The hand over the mouth does not prove racist abuse. It does not prove any abuse at all. It proves only that a player chose not to let cameras read his lips. That is it. That is the entire evidential foundation for a straight red card that ended a World Cup campaign. A choice about privacy. A decision not to perform your private conversation for television audiences. That is now a sending-off offense in the most watched sporting event on Earth. And here is the part that the big channels absolutely will not say. This rule was created to solve a PR problem, not a sporting problem. FIFA needed to be seen to act after the Prestiani incident because the alternative, admitting that they could not prove the accusation and therefore could not justify the punishment, was worse for their image than punishing an innocent man. Once they had punished Prestiani, without conclusive evidence, they were committed. The rule had to follow, because without the rule, the punishment had no legal or ethical foundation. Today's red card is not a consequence of FIFA caring about racism on the pitch. If they cared about racism on the pitch, they would have invested in technology that can actually detect it. Today's red card is a consequence of FIFA needing to be consistent with a decision they made under pressure 18 months ago. A decision that was wrong then and is still wrong now. The manager of the affected team was asked about it in the post-match press conference. He sat at the table for a long moment before answering. Then he said something that I think every person who loves football heard in exactly the same way. He said his player is one of the most decent human beings he has ever worked with in football. He said he does not believe for 1 second that his player said anything that deserved a yellow card, let alone a red card. And then he said something very quiet and very precise that landed harder than anything else in that room. He said that football is a game played by human beings, and human beings cover their mouths when they want a private moment, and that should never be a crime. There are now 4 questions that the football world needs to answer before this tournament goes any further. The first is whether FIFA will review this specific decision and consider any retrospective action. Based on their history, the answer is almost certainly no, but the question needs to be asked publicly and repeatedly. The second is whether the affected team has any formal recourse under the tournament regulations to challenge the red card. Legal experts who specialize in sports arbitration are already being consulted, and FIFA should expect a formal submission before the quarterfinals. The third is whether any of the 7 federations who objected to this rule before the tournament will now escalate their position, given that the theoretical harm they warned about has now materialized into actual concrete sporting damage. And the fourth question, which is the most important of all, is the one that gets asked in the final and the one that FIFA is most afraid of. What happens when this red card is shown in a semifinal? What happens when this red card is shown in the final itself? What happens when the most watched sporting moment of the next 4 years is a player covering his mouth and the referee reaching for his pocket and the world watching a World Cup final decided not by football, but by a hand gesture and a rule that was created to manage a PR crisis? That moment is coming. The rule is still in place. The tournament continues. And FIFA, which asked everyone to chill and relax when 7 federations were threatening to walk out before the first match, now has a rather more specific problem than general institutional tension. They have a precedent, they have a victim, they have a team going home, and they have a tournament that is one more incident away from the kind of crisis that no amount of carefully worded press releases can contain. Subscribe if you are not already subscribed. This channel will cover every development in this story as it happens. The next video is coming before you expect it, and what I have been told in the last few hours about FIFA's internal response to today's red card is something that changes the picture entirely. I wanted to verify it before publishing it here because this channel does not deal in rumors, it deals in information. And when that information is confirmed, you will hear it here first. 7 federations warned FIFA this was coming. FIFA did not listen. Today it happened. We'll see what comes next.